My father called my husband the security guard at my sister's wedding. 30 minutes later, the police changed everything. The champagne glass rang out across the ballroom like a gunshot. 120 guests froze mid-sentence. The violinist stopped mid-bow, and my father's voice, smooth, confident, the voice of a man who had never once been wrong in public, cut through the silence like a blade. Before we begin the toasts, could someone please escort the security staff back to the designated area? Every single head in that crystal-lit ballroom turned, and every single pair of eyes landed on my husband. He was standing right beside me. Tailored black suit, cufflinks, fresh haircut, the most composed man in the room. And in 3 seconds flat, 120 people measured him, judged him, and filed him away. I felt it happen. I felt the air shift. I felt the weight of 100 silent verdicts fall on the man I loved. And that was the moment I realized my father had never once actually looked at Elias. He had only ever seen the uniform. My name is Amara Collins. I'm 29 years old. My family built a commercial real estate empire across 3 states. My grandfather bought his first strip mall in 1978 with nothing but nerve and a handshake loan. My father turned that into 47 properties. My sister Isabella was named vice president at 27. Her photo hangs in the lobby. Glossy frame, power suit, perfect smile. Mine does not. Not because I failed, but because I chose architecture instead of management. And in the Collins family, that felt like choosing art school over survival. At every dinner, I was introduced as the creative one. In our house, that translated to the one who doesn't understand real business. So when I brought Elias home, my father asked exactly one question. Does he have a 5-year plan? I said yes. He said good. Because security work isn't sustainable. And that was it. Conversation over. Case closed. They never asked what his plan was. Never asked what he'd studied. Never asked what he was building at 3 a.m. every night while everyone else was asleep. They saw the uniform. They stopped looking. Here's what they didn't know. 3 months before that wedding, Elias closed a $42 million acquisition deal. He had founded a modular housing startup in a rented warehouse 2 blocks from the building where he used to work the night security shift. He built energy-efficient housing units that could be fully assembled in under 48 hours, designed specifically for disaster relief zones. He had spent 3 years pitching investors, getting doors slammed in his face, and coming back anyway. 17 rejections. 17 times someone looked at him, calculated his background, and said no. On the 18th pitch, a venture capital group in Seattle said yes, because they cared about impact, not pedigree. But Elias never announced it. He never posted about it. He never walked into a family dinner and said, "Watch this." He believed success didn't need applause. It needed structure. So when my father said, "security guard," and the room laughed, that uncomfortable, polite laugh that wealthy rooms produce when powerful men make jokes, Elias simply adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at me, not with anger, not with hurt. He looked at me the way he always does when someone tries to shrink him, steady and quiet, and asked with his eyes, "Are you okay?" I was not okay. But before I could say a word, the ballroom doors opened. Not a polite knock, not a soft entry. The doors came open with the firm, deliberate push of authority, and 2 uniformed police officers walked in, flanking a woman in a navy blazer carrying a leather folder embossed with the city's seal. The violinist did not resume playing. Nobody moved. The woman scanned the room with the kind of calm that belongs to people who hold cards no one else has seen yet. "Mr. Elias Navarro?" The name landed in the silence like a stone in still water, and that's when you could actually feel the room recalibrate, because nobody in that ballroom had heard anyone address Elias with that tone, that weight, that expectation of his full attention. Elias stepped forward without hesitation, unhurried, unbothered. "That's me." My father's smirk dissolved. Someone near the bar whispered, Is this a permit issue? Because that's the assumption in wealthy rooms. When authority arrives unexpectedly, someone must be in trouble. The woman opened her folder and smiled. On behalf of the Mayor's Office and the Department of Housing, we are here to formally recognize your company, Mr. Navarro, for securing the largest private-public partnership for emergency housing development in state history. The room went silent in a way I had never heard a room go silent before. Not awkward silence, gravity silence, the kind where you can feel 120 minds doing math simultaneously. She continued, "Your company will be leading the $120 million statewide rapid housing initiative beginning next quarter. $120 million. That number did something to the room that no amount of polite conversation ever could. You could see it happen in real time. The recalculations, the sudden resorting of social order, the quiet panic of people who had laughed 60 seconds ago and were now hoping no one remembered. Phones came out. People who had been leaning away from our side of the room were suddenly leaning in. Here's the psychological thing that nobody talks about. When external authority validates someone publicly, not a friend, not family, not the person themselves, it flips social proof instantly. It's not the same as self-promotion. Self-promotion triggers skepticism. But when two police officers and a city official walk into a wedding reception and ask for you by name, the entire room experiences something close to shock and awe. The same people who'd laughed were now whispering, "That's visionary. That's impressive. How did we not know about this?" Because they never asked. That's the only reason. My father moved first. He stepped forward with his hand outstretched, chin up, smile returning, doing what powerful men do when the tide turns. They try to get ahead of it. Elias, I had no idea. Elias shook his hand, firmly, respectfully, and then he said the line that will stay with me for the rest of my life. "With respect, sir, you never asked. Not shouted, not bitter, not performed for the crowd. Just stated, clean and final, like a door closing." That line did more damage than any insult could have, because it wasn't emotional, it was factual, and facts in public rooms carry a weight that anger never can. The police officers weren't there for drama. City protocol requires official escort when announcing state-level government contracts at private events, a security measure, which meant the man my father had publicly called security staff now required a security escort of his own. The irony was not lost on the room. You could see people processing it, the visual reversal, the poetic justice of it. And when humans process something like that in a group, they rush to align with the new dominant narrative. Within 2 minutes, the compliments started. I always admired self-made entrepreneurs. Humble beginnings. That's the American dream, right there. I respect that kind of vision. I watched the herd mentality rewrite memory in under 3 minutes. The same guests who had avoided our table all evening were suddenly orbiting it. But I need to stop here, because this story isn't really about the 120 million, it's about the years before that night. It's about my mother asking, gently, sweetly, if Elias needed help finding more stable work. It's about Christmas dinners where I defended him quietly because I didn't trust the room to see what I saw. It's about the corporate galas I almost didn't bring him to because I didn't want to watch people measure him and come up short. That's what was collapsing in that ballroom, not just my father's arrogance, the illusion that worth is something you inherit, that value is something you wear, that success only counts if the right people can see it from across the room. The violinist eventually resumed playing. Guests came to Elias one by one. 3 investors near the dessert table, 2 city officials exchanging cards. My father's longest-running business rival shook Elias's hand and held it a beat too long, the kind of grip that means I want in. In elite circles, that means exactly one thing. Status has shifted, and status shifts change behavior faster than anything else on Earth. My sister Isabella stood in her white gown, mascara threatening everything, and for the first time all night she wasn't looking at her new husband or her flowers or the 5-tier cake taller than the flower girl. She was looking at Elias like she was seeing him for the first time. Because she was. My father raised his glass one more time near the end of the evening, voice slightly unsteady. To unexpected success. Elias raised his glass back. To work. The difference between those two phrases drew a line between two entire worldviews. One believes success arrives. One believes success is built. Brick by brick, rejection by rejection, 3 a.m. by 3 a.m. 2 days after the wedding, my father called. He asked to meet, used the phrase, discuss potential synergies, which is corporate language for I misjudged you and I don't know how to say it. Elias agreed to meet, but not at the Collins corporate headquarters, on neutral ground, because he understood that power dynamics live in the details, and he had stopped shrinking himself into other people's spaces a long time ago. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. My father apologized, not a perfect apology, but a real one. He said he had spent his entire life equating visible wealth with visible worth. He said he had never respected work that came with a uniform. He said he had seen hierarchy before he ever saw humanity. And that admission, from a man who had spent 60 years being right, cost him more than any lost deal ever could. Humility in powerful men feels like surgery without anesthesia. 6 months later, the Collins Corporation invested $8 million into Elias's expansion. Not charity, not a favor, a strategic partnership. My father personally insisted the press release list Elias as founder and CEO. Not son-in-law, not family, not anything except exactly what he had built himself to be. That small detail was the loudest thing my father ever said. My sister postponed her honeymoon for a week to visit one of the modular housing sites. She walked the floor. She asked questions, real ones, without agenda. How does this actually work? Why this market? What's the 10-year vision? Elias answered all of it. No resentment, no performance. Because secure people don't need revenge. They need impact. 8 months after the wedding, my father stood at a business summit and introduced Elias to a room full of the same kind of people who had laughed in that ballroom. And he said this man built something I couldn't see because I was too busy looking at the wrong metrics. I had waited years to hear my father say something like that, and when it came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like relief. Elias still drives the same truck. He still wears work boots to the job sites. He still wakes up at 5 a.m. Nothing about him changed that night in the ballroom. The only thing that changed was what other people were willing to see. So here's the uncomfortable question this story leaves behind. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a person you have already measured incorrectly. Someone you dismissed based on surface evidence, a job title, a zip code, a first impression, a uniform. Someone you never asked a second question about. And if the city seal and the navy blazer and the 120 million walked into the room tomorrow, would you be proud of how you treated them? That's the mirror. That's the part that's supposed to be uncomfortable. Because reputation isn't destroyed by strangers. It's revealed by witnesses. And on that night, 120 witnesses watched arrogance collapse under the weight of a truth that had been quietly building for years. If you have ever been underestimated, let this remind you that validation delayed is not validation denied. The work is the proof. Keep building. If you have ever underestimated someone, let this remind you that humility learned privately is far less painful than humility forced publicly in a crystal ballroom in front of 120 people who will remember every second of it. Because sometimes the man you called security staff is securing something so much bigger than a door. And sometimes the loudest laugh in the room becomes the quietest voice in the end.